Hi, welcome back to my studio. We hope you've been enjoying the videos that we've done for you so far. And today we thought we'd give you a little bit more information about basting quilts. So often we're asked, why do you baste? When do you baste? So we go through a few of the issues. I've got this little illustration here. This is just a roll of paper. If you think of this as your quilt, you've got multiple layers of quilt, multiple layers of paper. As it rolls up on the bars of your quilt, of your frame, you end up with the layers shifting. So the same is going to happen with your quilt if you don't fix down and secure areas as you go. And the easiest way to do it, or one of the ways to do it, is by basting. You might also use stitch in the ditch. So if you have a traditional quilt with borders and blocks, you can stitch in the ditch around each of those as you roll down through the quilt. That will do the same thing. Sometimes though, you have a quilt, maybe it is a whole cloth quilt, so you've got a design on it, you don't necessarily have too much stitch in the ditch, or you've got a secondary design that you want to put on the quilt. Then you need to be able to start in different places. Your design might start in the center and radiate out, so you want to start stitching in the center. But you can't do that unless you've basted your quilt, otherwise you're going to end up with all kinds of bubbles and pleats in the back. You won't see it in the front, but you're going to see it in the back, and you don't want to be undoing stuff. So we're going to go through and show you how the machines can help you with your basting and the different techniques that you can use. Okay, so if you look at the screen, this is actually for an Avante, but most of the handy quilter machines are very similar. I've got it set at the moment in regulated mode, and it's set on 12 stitches per inch. So that would be my normal stitching length for general quilting. If I want to baste, I can reduce my stitch length. So I can press the minus that is on the screen, or I can press the minus on the handlebar too, and it will do the same thing. If you look here, the number is decreasing. So when I get to 4 stitches per inch, my stitch is going to be 1/4 of an inch apart. If I keep going, I can get to a 1/2 inch baste, a 1 inch baste, a 2 inch baste, or a 4 inch baste. So that means that stitch is now going to be 4 inches long. That's a bit long for me personally. 1/2 inch or even the 1/4 inch is sufficient, but you've got lots of different options of what you can choose. So one of the places that you would want to baste first is going to be the top of your quilt. You want to stitch yourself a nice straight line along your batting and backing using your channel locks, and then place the top of your quilt against that stitched line, so you know you're starting off square. But then you want to stitch the quilt top to it. I've set now the machine to a 4 stitches per inch, so a 1/4 inch baste, and I'm just going to start to move the machine. Okay, you can see it's taking long stitches. If you have a extra fullness in your top border here, just use your hand on the side of the machine here. You can see this is the bottom of my machine. If I put my hand here and I just press as I go along, it allows me to just pull in some of that fullness. So the basting stitch is going to really help you there. If you find you've got too much fullness or a lot of fullness, go to a 1/2 inch baste. Do the same. Keep your hand on the side here, just pressing down. You'll see now it stitches less often. That allows you to bring in a lot of the fullness that you've got to deal with and make sure you've got it under control. If I'm working on a whole cloth quilt or a large area of a quilt that I want to stabilize but come back to actually quilt at a later stage, I want to baste it down. So we normally work on the principle of leaving about a 5 inch gap between your stitching lines, your basting lines. So I'm going to do that now. I'm on the side of my quilt here. I'm just going to bring up the thread, do a little bit of a tie off that it can, or tie on that it can hold those threads in place, and then stitch across the quilt. You can use your channel locks. I've got the 1/2 inch baste stitch on, so you can see it feels a bit weird, but it's putting a nice basting stitch in for me. And the advantage is when I want to stitch that area, it's very easy to take out. I don't have to struggle and pick out small stitches. It's going to be really easy to take it out. You can also, you don't have to use a straight stitch. You could use a really big meander that would go over your area and do the same job. You can also think of the thread that you're going to use. Today I've got a turquoise normal glide thread in here. It makes it nice and easy to see so that I can take it out before I actually stitch over it doing my proper quilting. It's nice and visible. Your other option would be a water-soluble thread. Okay, so this one I have in a Ziploc bag to keep it away from moisture, because when you put it in water, it dissolves. So if you put this thread in your top thread and your bobbin, you can stitch entirely all over your quilt to stabilize it, to baste it, and then do all your quilting. You don't have to take any of this thread out, because when you wash your quilt, it's going to dissolve. It's a very nice product, but again, I keep it in the bag just to make sure that the moisture in the air doesn't get to it and mess it up. If you don't have a machine with basting functions to it, you can use it in manual at a slower speed, and it can work the same way. So put on a low speed and move your machine reasonably quickly, you'll end up with a long stitch that is easier to take out. We'll do the same thing, but if you have the basting stitches, they're just so easy. The other alternative, which is not necessarily the best if you have the basting stitches, is to use flower head pins, so flat pins. If I pin my quilt at the same kind of distance apart as I would with my stitching, it's going to hold those layers together. The problem with that is you can catch your hands on them, and if you're not concentrating, you can sew over them. So whilst they do roll up nicely with the quilt and not leave bobbles and wobbles, you're better off using a basting stitch if you have that function on your machine. So remember, we said about using a big meander. If you're not exactly sure what I was meaning, let me just demonstrate. The machine is again in a 1/2 inch basting stitch. I'm going to turn it on, and as I move, I can catch in all the areas of the quilt that I want to be stabilized. So you've got this nice function on your machine, but you don't necessarily do whole cloth quilts or quilts with secondary designs. It's great if you have, like we all get, those blocks that have got a bit of extra fullness to them. They puff up a little bit, and you need to control that fullness of the fabric before you quilt your design. Otherwise you end up pushing it to the sides and ending up with pleats in the fabric. So you can quilt just a small area. You don't have to quilt to baste. You don't have to baste the whole quilt. You can just baste a block that could be more problematic that you want to sort out. Other functions or other places where you can use basting is to help other people, other quilters. If you can offer a service of basting quilts, someone who doesn't have space to baste a quilt at home, you can do the basting for them, then they can go and do their own machine free motion stitching on it. Or you could do basting for hand quilters. Then they don't have to scratch around on the floor pinning for hours. You can do it reasonably quickly and easily for them, and it's all done.
So I'm going to show you quickly the basting function on your sit-down machine, on your Sweet 16. And it is an incredibly handy feature to use here as well, not just on your frame where you are advancing your quilt and moving to get to certain sections. Now, in order to do your basting on your quilt, on your sit down, you would have to either do a couple of pins or your glue base to still keep those layers together. You can't just put them together in the air and then come and try and baste it, because your fabrics will shift. But we are using the basting to be able to get rid of the pins, because I'm pretty sure if you've tried this before, you've done this and you've done a bigger quilt, the pins can actually weigh down your quilt and make it quite heavy, and they do catch on stuff. They catch on your ruler, they're in the air, they push your ruler out of the way, they might catch on your foot. So the ideal would be, once you've done your pin basting, is to come to your machine and use one of your basting functions, stitches, and baste in between your pins so that you can remove those pins. And again, you can either use straight lines, or you can use literally a meander that meanders between your pins. So that's going to give you a good exercise in your meander movement as well. Again, like Claire said, if you are using the water-soluble thread, then you don't even have to worry about removing your thread while you get there. You can literally just sew over it, and when you wash your quilt, it's gone. So when you look at your Sweet 16 screen, you have a basting function. It is this little button here above your needle up down. Now, just depending on the model or the year model of your machine, your screen might look a little bit different in the orientation, but just hunt down your basting function. And you would literally click on that, and it's going to show you at the top of the screen time intervals. Because now remember, if you don't have the true stitch on your machine, it is manual, it's not regulated. So the machine does not know how many stitches you are taking according to your movement, but it is rather counting the time or taking a breath between stitches. So you are able to adjust that time jump between your stitches by just upping it with your plus sign to higher number. Obviously, the higher the second number becomes, the longer it's going to wait before it puts a stitch down. So going up to 1.5 and 2 seconds, you are going to literally get a long stitch of about 2 inches. You need to remember not to move your fabric too fast, otherwise your stitches will become too long and they might break. So I would recommend come down and start on about 1/2 second or even 3/4 second to do your basting stitch with. So let me show you when you are actually stitching. The basting function at the moment I have on at 3/4 second. Now remember, what I said is that the machine is counting per timer. If you move your hands too fast, you're going to get a very long stitch and your thread might break. So wait for the machine to move or to put the stitch down before you move your fabric. So you kind of wait for the machine to move and then you breathe. And with your breathing function, you move your fabric. Okay? And while you breathe, you blink. So foot down. And I'm moving slowly to give the machine time to do the stitch. If I move faster, I'm going to break my thread. If you want the machine to sew faster, so if you are a hasty quilter, you move fast, you quilt fast, then bring your second intervals down to 1/2 second intervals. You see now she goes a little bit faster and you can comfortably move. This is actually a very comfortable speed to do your basting, and make sure that you move in between your pins. Don't catch a pin while you're at it. So this is a function I use a lot when I do my whole cloth quilts. Yes, on the sit down, and I can remove those pesky pins and they're out of the way, especially when we do a lot of ruler work. So I would recommend you put your water soluble thread top and bottom, baste your quilt, remove the pins, and you are free to go. Now remember, when you are done with your basting and you want to resume your normal quilting, you need to deactivate your basting function, and you can do that simply by clicking on the baste function again, and it'll tell you at the top is a 0 speed, but your normal stitching speed will still appear. So what if your machine doesn't have a specific basting function? You would still be able to do this by slowing your machine down a lot and moving your hands faster, thereby achieving a long stitch. So I have the machine set up now at about 13 to 15% of the sewing speed, and I'm just going to move to achieve a stitch that's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a 1/2 an inch long, just depending on the fullness. So let's go and see. So she's nice and slow, and I just move my fabric faster and I get that long stitch. And should you have volume that you need to control, should this be a problem block or a border, you are going to control your fabric by pulling it a little bit away from the sewing direction. So if I'm now going to stitch towards me, or moving my fabric away, I want to pull the fabric in the opposite direction so that I can contain the fullness in an area and lock it down with the basting stitch. Otherwise, it's just going to all run to one end and pucker. And that's exactly what you're trying to avoid. So by pulling my fabric a little bit more towards the opposite side of the stitching, I can control the volume and just get it all in place, tied down, nothing's moving anywhere, and I can happily quilt without puckers. So let me tell you a little bit about why this is such a fabulous machine and a sure favorite of a lot of quilters around the world. It is a dedicated free motion machine. All of this throat space, all of this height means you have a lot less struggling in areas to get to all your free motion. Look at the beautiful lighting that you have. Everything is clear and visible. And what's important for me on the lighting is that it's not a yellow light. So you get a true reflection of what is going on right here where you are stitching. In addition to the lovely throat space that you've got, the fact that the machine is standing head on to you and not like our domestic machines which sits to the side, means you have a lot more space on the ends and the sides of your machine to work with your quilt without having to contest with a machine in the space and in your way. Of course, the lovely size table, which is about 1 meter by 1 meter, is fantastic when you don't have the footprint or the space in your home for a bigger frame or a longarm machine. This is a great option. And you don't have to stand, you can sit and quilt. And no matter your size or length, the table is also height adjustable to fit you and suit your needs. You can adjust the speed on your foot control and control the speed so that you don't, for instance, sew too fast. And it has a great functionality where you can program 3 speeds, your 3 most favorite speeds for the different type of stitching that you do. You have your needle up and down function. You have your foot control that gives you a half needle function as well when you do a light tap. So you don't necessarily have to touch the screen to get your needle up and down. It also gives you a guide on your tension, which is an easy set tension, a number to remember, trying to not to fiddle, or when you need to change your tension, you would then know for the different types of threads that you are using, you can allocate the easy numbering therefore. Your Sweet 16 comes standard with your ruler foot and your open toe foot, but you can also add on any of the other handy quilter feet like the couching foot, square foot, the glide foot, the sure foot, which is your extra height ruler foot, for all of those special or custom details that you can add on. So we have a Mother's Day promotion for you, which would be valid until the end of May. So put in those wish list items, and that would be when you purchase this lovely Sweet 16, you add on a true stitch and a table overlay to the value of more than 12,000 Rand for free. So let me tell you a little bit about why this is such a fabulous machine and a sure favorite of a lot of quilters around the world. It is a dedicated free motion machine. All of this throat space, all of this height means you have a lot less struggling in areas to get to all your free motion. Look at the beautiful lighting that you have. Everything is clear and visible. And what's important for me on the lighting is that it's not a yellow light. So you get a true reflection of what is going on right here where you are stitching. In addition to the lovely throat space that you've got, the fact that the machine is standing head on to you and not like our domestic machines which sits to the side, means you have a lot more space on the ends and the sides of your machine to work with your quilt without having to contest with a machine in the space and in your way. Of course, the lovely size table, which is about 1 meter by 1 meter, It's fantastic when you don't have the footprint or the space in your home for a bigger frame or a long arm machine. This is a great option. And you don't have to stand, you can sit and quilt. And no matter your size or length, the table is also height adjustable to fit you and suit your needs. You can adjust the speed on your foot control and control the speed so that you don't, for instance, sew too fast. And it has a great functionality where you can program 3 speeds, your 3 most favorite speeds for the different type of stitching that you do. You have your needle up and down function. You have your foot control that gives you a half needle function as well when you do a light tap. So you don't necessarily have to touch the screen to get your needle up and down. It also gives you a guide on your tension, which is an easy set tension, a number to remember, trying to not to fiddle, or when you need to change your tension, you would then know for the different types of threads that you are using, you can allocate the easy numbering therefore. Your Sweet 16 comes standard with your ruler foot and your open toe foot, but you can also add on any of the other handy quilter feet like the couching foot, square foot, the glide foot, the sure foot, which is your extra height ruler foot, for all of those special or custom details that you can add on. So we have a Mother's Day promotion for you, which would be valid until the end of May. So put in those wish list items, and that would be when you purchase this lovely Sweet 16, you add on a true stitch and a table overlay to the value of more than 12,000 Rand for free. The height of your sewing surface is extremely important, no matter whether you are on a sit-down, a domestic, a frame, any type of frame. The ergonomics of your working area is super important for you to be able to work for longer. So it's crucial to have a look at your current situation and make sure that you have a really good supportive chair that you are working on, but then also according to your body height and the chair, the table can height adjust. So the ideal that you would want your quilt surface to be is when you are sitting comfortably in your chair, preferably with your back towards or against the back of your chair so that you are supported, is that when you bend your elbow at a 90-degree angle, your hand should comfortably rest on the top of your work surface. Now, when you have a suite, for instance, start with it at the lowest setting that it is. Go and sit in front of your machine and have a look at where that is. You'll see that for my height on this specific chair, I can actually raise the table one click so that I can just get a little bit higher, that I don't have to bend my neck in order to see what I'm doing. So that is important. You can't also you shouldn't work at a quilt surface where you have to bend your arm at more than a 90-degree angle, because you are going to get fatigue and pain in your wrists, in your back, in your shoulders, in your elbow, all sorts of places, because you are not in a comfortable position that can last or that you can work on for a very long time. So it's easy to raise the machine. The table has on the legs 2 clamps or 2 clicks that you can just hold the bottom part of the leg down and lift the machine or lift the table. And if it's too high, same story, put the 2 clamps in and drop the table a little bit.
So Talene was explaining to you about the correct sitting position and the correct height of your table if you're a sit-down machine quilter. But basically the same principle applies if you use a frame-based machine. So she told you about needing a right angle in your elbow to be nice and relaxed and to be able to quilt for longer. The same applies here. If you stand in front of your frame, your arms resting on the bars, you should have more or less a right angle here in your elbow. Now, I have lots of people that come to my studio to quilt for classes and different events. So I have frames set at different levels. This is one that I don't use particularly often, and it's set a little bit lower. If I have my arm at a right angle here, you can see there's a bit of space here. So this frame would be good for someone who's a little bit shorter than me. So if I were to bend down and my arm was level, then it would be at a better height. So we've moved over to one of the machines that I use more often for my own quilting and for customer quilting, to the Infinity. This machine, the frame is set a little higher. So if I stand in front of it with my arms in a nice right angle, then it's at a good height for me. If you're standing to quilt, it can get really tiring. So I also have anti-fatigue mats on the floor here. They're a bit like memory foam, and they help to pad out, make the floor a bit softer. So it's better for your knees, for your back. You can just stand there a lot longer than if you are on tiles or wooden floors that are really hard on your body. So again, we've moved. Now we're standing in front of the Amara, which is the machine that I use the most when I'm doing custom quilting for customers. And I have my own quilt on here for a change today, that I've been working on. Custom quilting takes a lot of time, so it's doubly important, that's quadruply important, hey, that you've got your frame at the right height. If you look at this one, you tell me from what I've already explained that it's not at the right height. That is true for standing, but because custom quilting takes so long, I generally sit. So I have what's called a saddle chair. I can sit on this. Now I'm at a better height for my frame. So the frame is actually set for me at a good height. The added advantage of the Amara, the Forte, and the Infinity is you have adjustable handlebars. So even if your frame is not exactly at the right height, I can adjust the height of the handlebars like this and get them to a level where my arms are going to be more comfortable. So that's just an additional benefit that you can get when you have those adjustable handlebars. If you like to move around when you're quilting, so sometimes you want to stand, sometimes you want to sit, but you're working on a project that's taking a lot of hours. Another idea that you can consider is the Handy Quilter High Lift. It is a hydraulic lift system that you attach to the feet of your machine, and you can press a button to increase your height, take the height down. So then you could move the frame height between your ideal standing height and your ideal sitting height. It's just another option that's available that you can consider.